Welcome! This time on Woodworks, we'll make this elegant 3-panel screen out of mahogany with stunning gilded panels. So please, join us. Hi, I'm David Marks. Welcome to Woodworks. This 6-foot folding screen features frame and panel construction with mortise and loose tenon joinery. The panels will provide an artistic challenge as we gild them with copper leaf and then transform them with color and texture using a chemical patina. This 3-panel screen captivates the eyes with a flowing design that sweeps gently across the 3 panels. The soft glow of the gilding, contrasted with the subtle warmth and depth of the mahogany frames, combine to create furniture art with unsurpassed richness and elegance. I've already machined the parts for our frame out of some 4-quarter mahogany stock. I've milled them all 3/4 of an inch thick. Let's look at our prototype. The top rail is 17.5 inches long by 2 1/4 inches wide. The bottom rail is a bit wider at 3 1/4 inches. The stiles are 72 inches tall by 2 1/4 inches wide. By the way, each section is identical, so we're only going to show you how to make one. With the rail and stile stock already cut to final dimension, examine and match the grain pattern of each rail and stile so the grain flows around the frames. When the frames are assembled, the subtle grain will recede, and the focus of our attention will be on the panels. As we said, to hold our frame together, we're going to use mortise and loose tenon joinery. So let's lay out the mortises. Our top rail will have 1 1/4 inch step down. Our bottom rail will have a rise of 3 3/4 inches. Designate the top and bottom rail stock with some chalk, then mark the ends that will be joined together. Work your way around the frame, identifying the mortises with matching marks. Next, lay out the mortise marks on the ends of the top and bottom rail stock, and then on the ends of the stiles. Each mortise is the same size, 1 3/4 inches long, and centered in the ends of the stock. Next, use a plunge router with a 1/4 inch carbide router bit to make the mortises. We clamp the stiles into the tail vise alongside another board. This additional board supports the router and provides a reference for the fence. When cutting the mortises into rails, we tape the board on the end of the workbench so the fence of the router has a reference point. I made matching tenons. They're each just shy of 2 1/2 inches long by 1 3/4 inches wide and 1/4 inch thick. I rounded over the ends to match the mortises. I also added these little kerf cuts here on the sides. This will give the glue an escape channel and relieve some of the pneumatic pressure so they'll slide in easier and not have to be coaxed. Before we dry fit our frame, we'll lay out a rabbet for the trim that will hold the panel in place on one side of each piece of our frame stock. At the router table, we'll cut a rabbet 1/4 inch deep and 1/16 of an inch wide on the inside edge of the top and bottom rail stock. And since stop rabbets will be cut in the stiles, dry fit the frame and mark the boundaries where the top and bottom rails join the stiles. Using the same setup at the router table, cut the rabbet, stopping just shy of the marks. We'll remove the excess with a chisel later. We've cut our rails, stiles, mortises, tenons, and rabbets for our frames. When we come back, we'll put it all together. And if you want any more information about making this 3-panel screen, or any of the projects that we've made here on Woodworks, log on to our website at DIYnetwork.com.
Coming up, making beaded stops to hold our panel in place.
Welcome back. This time on Woodworks, we're making a gilded 3-panel screen, and I've just dry fit the frame. Looks like it's going together well. We may need to do a little sanding on the tenons to adjust the fit. So far, we've milled our mahogany frame stock, made the mortise and tenon joinery, and cut a rabbet on the inside edge of the frame to hold the panels. Now, we'll glue up our frame. This is a real simple glue up. We'll use yellow glue. I've taped up the edges with some blue tape. This will help catch the squeeze out and make cleanup easier. Assemble the frame on its side so that gravity works in our favor. Apply glue to the mortises and tenons. Join the top and bottom rails, then add the final side. Next, pull the joints together tightly with clamps. While the frame dries, let's make the stops that will hold the panels. Each stop is 7/16 of an inch wide. And see this bead? It's a 5/16 inch bead. We'll make 4 pieces, 2 long and 2 short pieces to make the stops. We'll miter the ends to connect them. We've milled 2 pieces of mahogany, 1 long piece and 1 short piece. They're 1 1/8 inches wide. Each strip will yield 2 stops. We'll bead both edges and then cut them in half. At the router table, use a 5/16 inch beading bit and round over the edges of both sides of the mahogany stock. It's safer to bead both edges while the stock is still wide. At the bandsaw, rip the stock in half to make 2 stops. Next, trim each panel stop again to get them to final dimension, 7/16 of an inch wide. These stops will hold the panel in place. Now, using the miter jig, cut a 45-degree angle on the ends of the stops. Use a stop block to ensure that the stops are the same length. Use the same technique for the long stops. Now, before we install our stops, we need to prepare our frame. Use a hand scraper to remove any hardened glue and level the joints flat. Then use a sharp chisel to square up the corners where the stop rabbet meets the through rabbet. Chamfer all the edges using a hand plane and sand the entire surface of the frame with some 220 grit sandpaper. Now we can attach the panel stops. Apply yellow glue to the rabbets and then set in the panel stops. Here's a tip. All you need is tape to secure the stops. The tape holds it just fine, and it's much easier than putting on cauls and clamps. While the glue sets, we can now focus our attention on the panels. We're going to make the panels out of masonite. It's important to have a smooth surface, and there's no reason to have a more expensive wood since they'll be covered in copper leaf. Each panel will be 61.5 inches long by 17.5 inches wide by 1/8 of an inch thick, smooth on both sides. The first step is to spray on a white pigmented shellac as a primer on our lightly sanded masonite panel. Spray on 3 coats on both sides, and in between each dried coat, sand with 220 grit sandpaper. The object is to have a smooth surface. This is red Japan paint. This paint is made from finely ground particles of pigment. We're going to use it as a backing color to the copper leaf. Any subtle cracks and gaps in the copper leaf will allow the rich red color to shine through. It's a lot like the veins of color in marble. Back in the finishing room, evenly spray on the Japan paint to both sides. After the paint dries, we'll spray on 2 coats of clear de-waxed shellac to protect it. We'll be right back.
Up next, learn how to gild like a pro.
Welcome back. We're making a 3-panel screen, and we're working on the panels. I'm applying the size or adhesive that will bind the copper leaf to the panels. So far, we've glued up our frame, made the stops that hold the panels, and prepped the masonite panels with primer, red paint, and sealed it with shellac. Now, we'll gild the panels. Gold size is like varnish. It's oil-based and it dries fast. It's really important that once the size is applied, no dust is created in the workshop because it will stick to the size. Be sure to apply it in a well-ventilated area. It'll take about an hour for it to set up or tack. That means sticky enough to start applying the copper leaf. Check the size by placing your knuckle on the surface. It should feel like it has the same level of stickiness as masking tape. That means the surface is ready. Copper leaf comes in a book of extremely fine sheets of copper that have been rolled into a thickness much thinner than paper. It comes in sheets that are 5.5 inches square. To apply, simply press the copper leaf sheet onto the surface of the panel. As soon as the leaf is pressed against the size, it detaches from the paper. The method that we'll use to apply the leaf is called no-tan gilding. That's a Japanese term which means creating negative space. The cracks and tears that we'll create will allow the red paint to show through. As you cover the entire surface, consider the balance between the copper and the red paint. If you're new to gilding, it may be a good idea to size 1/2 of the panel at a time, since the window of time for the size to set up is small. Once the panel is gilded, burnish the surface by applying pressure with some wax paper. When you're finished, let the panel set for 12 hours. This copper finish could never be achieved with paint. Gilding adds a new dimension to your work. It has a unique luster that adds depth and texture, a rich surface that looks great on these panels. Now take this goat hair brush and brush off the excess. The process is called tamping. And these little bits of copper are called skewings. Carefully brush off the skewings. I like to save the skewings by putting them into a jar so that I can use them for another project. Now we'll take these 3 gilded panels and apply a chemical patina to bring out some colors in the copper and give this surface a rich texture. Here's a tip. You should apply the chemicals now after gilding only one side of the 3 panels. After you patina this side and it's sealed with a vinyl sealer, turn them over and gild the backs and then patina that side. That way, the chemicals won't drip over to the other face and spoil your finished panels. To create the patina, mix a 1/4 teaspoon of potash sulfurated into a 1/2 cup of warm water. Then mix a 1/4 teaspoon of sodium sulfide with a 1/2 cup of warm water. When mixing and using these chemicals, it's always a good idea to wear gloves and safety goggles. Carefully pour the potash sulfurated and sodium sulfide into larger containers. With all 3 panels set side by side, we'll use some tissue paper to create some texture. Spray it with water, leaving some air pockets under the tissues. Now take a sponge soaked in the sodium sulfide solution and apply it. The reaction will occur immediately, darkening the copper. The chemicals oxidize the surface, traveling through the tissue by capillary attraction. When you're happy with the results, spray on water to stop the reaction, and then blot it with paper towels to remove any excess and let it dry. Now for the dramatic treatment that will cross all 3 panels. Soak a wide strip of cheesecloth in the potash sulfurated solution. Stretch out the cheesecloth onto a long plastic-covered board. Flip the board and cheesecloth onto the upper portion of all 3 panels. Lift the board, leaving the plastic and cheesecloth. Then gently press down on the plastic to set the cheesecloth. As the chemical reacts with the copper, it tarnishes, leaving the surface textured by the pattern of the cheesecloth. I love the texture the cheesecloth produces with the sulfurated potash. The rich black tones will be a great contrast to the copper. Now, if you find areas that remain that are too shiny, you can use a spray bottle filled with sodium sulfide to soften the highlights. As it dries, the sun will stop the chemical reaction. We'll let this sit out here in the sun for a few more minutes. We'll be right back.
Coming up, our 3-panel screen comes together and gets a final finish.
Welcome back. We've nearly completed making our gilded screen. Look at the great colors and textures the chemicals in the cheesecloth created. Now we'll seal it and finish it off with one of my favorite finishes, lacquer. If you'd like more information about making this 3-panel screen, log on to our website at DIYnetwork.com. So far, we've gilded the panels with copper leaf, created a chemical mixture, and used cheesecloth to make the textured patina. And now, we'll apply our protective finish. The first step in making a lacquer finish is to apply a vinyl sealer. This will seal in the great colors and keep the copper from oxidizing. It's a clear finish, and it's moisture resistant, and it's a great primer for our lacquer top coats. You only need 1 or 2 coats, and make sure you give it plenty of time to dry. As you spray, hold the gun approximately 8 to 12 inches from the panel surface and use steady, even strokes. I always tell students to think of their arm as a robot and maintain the same motion and angle. To get a richer, professional finish, I apply 6 to 8 coats of lacquer. After I've built up a few coats, I sand the surface with 320 grit sandpaper between each additional coat and finish up with a coat of satin lacquer. While the panels are drying, let's install the hinges. These are the hinges that we'll use. They have an antique copper finish, and they're designed specifically for folding screens. See how they work? They pivot on 2 sides. They're thin enough so that they won't interfere with closing the screen flat, so that you can store it easily. To install the hinges, we'll cut some mortises into the sides. For accuracy, clamp the 2 frames that will be hinged together side by side. Once the marks for the hinges are laid out, use a plunge router to cut the mortises to the correct depth, 1/8 of an inch deep. Then clean up the boundaries with a sharp chisel. Now drill pilot holes in the panel stops at the drill press. Before we install the hinges and the panels, let's apply the finish on the frames. First, we'll apply a few coats of potassium dichromate to darken the mahogany. Potassium dichromate has unique properties on mahogany. It gives it a beautiful deep red-brown color. This chemical is toxic, so when applying this treatment, wear safety glasses, gloves, and work in a well-ventilated area. Apply several coats until you get the desired tone. Then add several coats of tung oil to seal in the grain and highlight the color. Once the frame is dry, assemble the panels. Each panel fits neatly into the rabbet cut into the frame. Set the panel stops in place and secure them with antiqued brass screws. Notice that we're using a sheet of cardboard to protect the panels from being scuffed by the drill. The rich dark color of the mahogany frame surrounds, highlights, and displays the beautiful copper panels and their textured patina. An elegant way to reshape any room and display your woodworking talents and artistic expression. The lacquer finish on the panels will prevent any fading or discoloration as the panels age. The mahogany frames, however, with time, may need an additional coat of tung oil to keep them looking new. Thanks for watching. I'm David Marks. We'll see you next time on Woodworks.